When Apple announced Apple Intelligence, they said it was going to be this brand new Siri, which is going to be a lot more conversational, better, and overall just amazing in every way possible. Well, I'm here to tell you that I've tried it out for about a week. It sucks. I don't like it, and I think Apple is still very far behind in the AI game, as they have been for the past 10 years. So when Apple announced Apple Intelligence, I was very excited, but as you'll know from my previous videos, I had an iPhone 13 and couldn't have it. Well, now I have an iPhone 16, which I regret, might I add. I spoke about that in another video, but oh well, I have it and it's here. And I used Apple Intelligence on it for about 4 or 5 days, did a couple tests on my own, and then I realized that it's nothing like what Apple claimed, and it's still very far behind the AI game right now. I don't know if what I was expecting was a little much, but when I heard that Apple was pretty much revamping their entire Siri 10 years later, I thought it was going to be something similar to ChatGPT or ChatGPT's voice model. Since obviously ChatGPT is a competitor for a voice assistant or something similar, I was assuming that Apple would want to take them out of the market, and then they'd just make Siri as good as the ChatGPT voice model, and well, that way they'd either create some competition or something similar. To my surprise, when I started using Apple Intelligence and I'd ask it simple commands, it just wasn't in any way conversational, and it just wasn't any good. For example, one of the really good things about the ChatGPT voice model is how conversational it is. You can actually have a conversation with it and ask it questions and it'll answer. It's not just some robot. It actually thinks like a human. And that's what makes it really, really cool. So when I decided to speak to Siri, or I guess the new Apple Intelligence Siri, and I was expecting a conversation, it wasn't that in any way. It was still kind of acting like old Siri would. So I guess you could categorize the new Apple Intelligence as a new Siri, but with its really base hardcore software still as old Siri, if that makes any sense. As a little test, I decided to add 10 different reminders in the Reminders app and then just kind of play around with Siri and see what she'd say. When I asked her to give me what reminders I had for the day, she answered properly and said, well, here are the reminders you have for today. But when I asked such a simple question like, hey, what's the fourth reminder about? It simply couldn't tell me anything. It just told me that it doesn't know how to do what I'm asking it, and then it told me to ask ChatGPT that same question, which makes no sense because the only question I asked her was, hey, what's the fourth one? So then Siri went to ChatGPT and asked ChatGPT, what's the fourth one? And then ChatGPT came back to me and said, well, I don't know what the fourth one is because it doesn't know what we're speaking about. So when Apple said it really picks up on context or in native apps or things like that, it might be the case, but it wasn't the case for me. Something as simple as Siri being able to tell me what my fourth reminder is when it's literally written right there, I think is something so simple that she should actually be able to do. Yet she just wasn't able to. I tried it out 3 or 4 times, and every single time she'd just ask ChatGPT, what's the fourth one? Or what's the third one? Or whatever question I gave it. I also saw a video recently of another YouTuber, which I'm obviously not going to name, where they tested old Siri versus new Siri. But the thing is, the test honestly was so basic that it proved to me in a way how new Siri is still nowhere near being any good. The YouTuber was asking questions like, what's the weather gonna be? Is it gonna rain this week? Is it gonna rain tomorrow? Who's playing this weekend? What's the over-under? And it's simple things that you could just search on Google or go into any other app. That's not what personal assistants are for. A personal assistant is something like ChatGPT, where I could ask it, hey, give me a meal plan based on these macros, take out potatoes if you want, add vegetables, and then give me a workout plan for the next 6 weeks. And that's something that ChatGPT can handle. And it can handle it very, very easily, even if I ask it in voice mode. And it's something right now that Siri can't even think of doing. Even if you put the type to Siri, it's still just regular Siri. It's not going to be able to do any of that. So apart from Apple charging $1,000 for a new phone with Apple Intelligence, because obviously, apparently, Apple Intelligence is so good that they don't offer it in the previous models, you're simply paying those $1,000 for an Apple Intelligence, which is pretty much mediocre at best. So let's take a look at the features that Apple actually claimed for Apple Intelligence. And the first one being the writing tools. Now, I completely understand the feature of having writing tools and why it could be good, but in my opinion, most people are going to use their computer when they actually are writing and need writing tools. And if you already are on your computer, I think it just makes a lot more sense to use ChatGPT since it is better instead of using Apple Intelligence. Another feature that they added was the sort of image area of things where they added Genmoji and the image playground, two features that I ended up using for about 30 seconds and then just didn't understand why they were created in the first place. I completely understand how Apple as a company pretty much tries to take out competitors in every way possible, and they pretty much just try to own the entire market of any category they enter into. And with ChatGPT already creating pictures and things like Dolly being out there, then obviously Apple wants a piece of that pie and they want to control a piece of that market as well. I completely understand that. But it's just a feature that's so useless that it really does nothing in the phones. I used the image playground for about 30 seconds. I asked it to create a duck wearing a hat. It did it. And that was it. What am I supposed to do with a duck wearing a hat, you know? If anything, I could go to ChatGPT and ask it the same question and probably get a better answer. Another thing along the same lines was Genmoji. Again, on paper, it sounds really cool. You can create your own emojis, things like that. But it really isn't like that. I mean, I asked it to create, I think it was a crying face or something like that. And the faces just look horrendous. I'm going to try to put one up on screen right now. If I don't, then I'm sorry, but I will try so you guys can see how actually useless it is. And even if you do ask it to create something or an emoji that is already created, it still doesn't do it properly. And so you're kind of left with an emoji that you're not going to be able to use because it just looks off in a way. And then one of the last, or I guess bigger features that Apple did say was that Siri was going to be conversational, which is something we've wanted for many, many years. And I completely agree in that Apple Intelligence Siri is much better than old Siri, but I don't agree it's good in any way. I think it's still completely useless. And honestly, if you're going to use a voice assistant, just go for the ChatGPT one, since like I mentioned previously, it can actually handle a lot of tasks. This is all to say that Apple is still far behind on AI. Now, I do give them that a few years back when they did release Siri, that actually was revolutionary. That was amazing. It was never before seen. And that actually did create a new market, or I guess a new thing that every phone had to keep up with. But since then, they themselves didn't keep up with Siri and it lagged behind a lot of its other competitor voice assistants. Granted, back then when they did release Siri, there wasn't any other voice assistant to compare it to. And obviously, if you're the only one on the market, people are going to think you're amazing, which I guarantee you, we all did think Siri was amazing at one point in time. But when the other voice assistants, such as Google or Samsung's voice assistants, start coming out, then you can actually see how Apple's one really is far behind. And that's pretty much the case with Apple Intelligence Siri. Since now we actually do have something to compare it to, in saying that the technology is already there. It's not that Apple is creating some revolutionary thing that doesn't even exist. No, that's not the case. We have the ChatGPT voice model. We know how good voice assistants can be. Apple is just not doing a hard enough job on actually implementing that into their phones. So if this new Apple Intelligence Siri is anything like the previous Siri we had, then the Apple Intelligence Siri is just going to keep on being behind the competition for years and years to come, and it's just never going to be up to par with things like ChatGPT's voice model or be able to handle such complex tasks. I would go as far as to say that the Apple Intelligence Siri is still as useless as the original Siri was. Yes, it's true that before then, since we didn't have anything to compare to, or yes, it's true that before then the technology wasn't as advanced, so we didn't know that we could require so many things from our voice assistants. But now that ChatGPT's voice model is out and we know exactly what we can ask for in a voice assistant, when we see Apple Intelligence's Siri do pretty much nothing, then we know that if the technology is already out there and you're not using it or you're not getting it, then there's something wrong in the software. So this was just my take on the new Apple Intelligence Siri and if it's actually any good. If you did like this video and are interested in another one, the previous one I did is about my new iPhone 16 and why I kind of regret buying it. And I also have a previous one about the new iPhone 16e that came out, why it gets so much hate and why I personally love the phone and was about to get it before I ended up getting this one. If you guys like any of those videos, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. I really would appreciate it. And I guess I'll see you guys in the next one.